My best friend betrayed me by dating my ex and turned my family against me, but their perfect relationship imploded spectacularly at our high school reunion. I never thought I'd find myself writing one of these posts, but here I am, sitting in front of my laptop, trying to untangle a mess that's been building for years. I guess I'll start with the basics. I'm 26 now, but this whole thing started when I was 17. I don't know if this is going to come off as dramatic or petty, but this story isn't just about losing a friend, it's about losing everything I thought I could count on. And then, years later, watching it all blow up in the most unexpected way. Let me rewind to my senior year of high school. Back then, I had this best friend, Sarah. We were inseparable, the kind of friends who shared everything: secrets, dreams, clothes, even the same taste in music and movies. We'd been friends since middle school, and by senior year, we'd already planned out our whole future. College together, maybe even renting an apartment. She was more like a sister to me than a friend. We laughed at the same dumb jokes, gossiped about crushes, and helped each other through all the usual high school drama. Sarah was one of those people who lit up every room she walked into. She had this bubbly personality that made everyone feel like they were her best friend. She was charismatic, pretty, and just magnetic. Wherever she went, people followed. She was the kind of person who was always the center of attention, but not in an obnoxious way. People just gravitated toward her. And I liked being her best friend. I felt lucky to have her in my life, like she was someone special, and by extension, so was I. We made plans for the future, talking about which colleges we wanted to go to, where we wanted to travel, and what kind of lives we'd have. I imagined us being friends forever, maybe even living next door to each other with our future families. Then came Mark. Mark was the new guy that year, having transferred from a different school for senior year, which was unusual enough in itself. Everyone was curious about him from day one. He was tall, athletic, with a laid-back charm that made girls crush on him and guys want to be his friend. I wasn't immune to it either. The first time I saw him, it was like that scene out of a teen movie where everything else fades, and it's just you and the guy in slow motion. I felt like I was the luckiest girl in the world when he started showing interest in me. Mark and I hit it off pretty quickly. We had the same taste in music, loved the same cheesy 80s movies, and just clicked in that effortless way. It wasn't long before we were officially a couple. And in those first few months, everything was perfect. We'd go to football games together, take long walks after school, and hang out with Sarah on the weekends. It was like this perfect little triangle: me, my best friend, and my boyfriend. We all got along so well that I never even thought to be suspicious. Why would I? Sarah had her own thing going on, and Mark and I were happy, or at least I thought we were. But things started to shift around the middle of senior year. Mark began pulling away, slowly at first. He stopped texting me as much, canceled plans more frequently, and when we did hang out, it was like he was somewhere else. I chalked it up to stress from soccer and school. We were both busy, applying to colleges and trying to make sure our grades stayed up. But it wasn't just Mark that was acting weird, Sarah was too. She wasn't as available as she used to be, always coming up with excuses for why she couldn't hang out. When we did spend time together, there was this distance between us that hadn't been there before. It was like she was keeping something from me, but I didn't want to push. I figured she'd tell me when she was ready. The first real red flag happened at one of our friends' house parties. Mark was supposed to come, but he texted me last minute to say he wasn't feeling well. I was disappointed, but I went anyway, figuring I'd just catch up with Sarah and some of our other friends. I remember sitting in the backyard, talking with a group of people, when I noticed Sarah had disappeared. It was unlike her to leave a party early, especially without telling me. I figured she must have gone inside to use the bathroom or something, so I went to look for her. What I found instead was a group of people gossiping near the kitchen. One of them was saying something about seeing Sarah leave the party early with someone. I tried not to think too much of it. She probably got tired or had to go home for some reason. But as I eavesdropped a little more, I heard something that made my stomach drop. They mentioned Mark's name. They were talking about how Sarah and Mark had been seen leaving together. I didn't want to believe it, so I convinced myself they must have been mistaken. Maybe it was someone else, or maybe they were just talking about a different night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The weeks following that night were a blur of suspicion and denial. I tried talking to Mark about how distant he'd been, but he always had some excuse ready. He was too busy with soccer practice, too tired from studying, too stressed about his future. I tried to believe him, but the nagging doubt in the back of my mind wouldn't go away. And Sarah? She wasn't much better. I tried to reconnect with her, but every time I did, she seemed distracted or evasive. There was this awkward tension between us, like we were both avoiding something. But what? I didn't know. All I knew was that things weren't the same, and it was killing me. I felt like I was losing both my best friend and my boyfriend at the same time, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Then came the day everything came crashing down. It was a Friday afternoon, just a few weeks before graduation. I was sitting in the cafeteria when Amy, one of my friends, came over and sat down across from me. I could tell something was bothering her. She had that look on her face like she was holding back bad news. I asked her what was up, and she hesitated for a moment before finally telling me that she'd seen Mark and Sarah together at the mall the previous weekend. They weren't just hanging out, they were holding hands. At first, I didn't believe her. I couldn't. It was too insane to even consider. Mark and Sarah? Together? It didn't make sense. They wouldn't do that to me. But Amy insisted, saying she saw it with her own eyes. My heart sank into my stomach, and suddenly everything started to fall into place. The distance, the weird behavior, the gossip, it all made sense now. I felt like I was going to be sick. I didn't want to believe it, but I had to know for sure. So later that day, I confronted Mark. I was nervous, my hands shaking as I approached him after soccer practice. I asked him point blank if he was cheating on me with Sarah. His reaction told me everything I needed to know. He didn't deny it. He just stood there, looking at the ground, and said, "I'm sorry." That was it. No explanation, no apology, just those two empty words. I was devastated. I didn't even have the energy to yell or cry. I just walked away, feeling numb. But the worst part wasn't even what Mark had done, it was what Sarah had done. She was supposed to be my best friend, the person I trusted most in the world. And she had gone behind my back with my boyfriend. I couldn't let it go, so I texted Sarah and asked her to meet up. I needed to hear her side of the story. Maybe she'd apologize, maybe she'd explain, maybe there was something, anything, that could make this make sense. We met up at a park near our school, and when she showed up, I could tell right away that this wasn't going to go the way I hoped. She didn't look sorry. In fact, she looked annoyed, like this whole thing was some kind of inconvenience for her. I asked her why she'd done it, why she'd gone behind my back with Mark. And do you know what she said? She said, "We didn't plan this, it just happened. You should understand." Understand? I was supposed to understand that my best friend and my boyfriend had been sneaking around behind my back for who knows how long? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt like I was living in some twisted nightmare where nothing made sense. Sarah didn't even seem to feel guilty about it. She acted like I was the one being unreasonable for being upset. That was the moment I realized I didn't know her at all. I walked away from that conversation feeling completely shattered. It wasn't just about losing Mark, it was about losing the person I thought would be in my life forever. The worst part was, Sarah didn't even seem to care. She and Mark became a couple not long after, and they didn't even try to hide it. They walked around school together, holding hands like they hadn't just blown up my life. And somehow, everyone seemed okay with it. My friends were uncomfortable but didn't say much, and even my family, who had always loved Sarah, seemed to think I was overreacting. My mom told me I needed to be the bigger person and move on, that these things happen, and I should just focus on my future. My younger sister, who had always looked up to Sarah, couldn't understand why I was so upset. It felt like the world was upside down, like I was the villain for being hurt. I felt completely alone. The rest of senior year was a blur of numbness and pain. I avoided Sarah and Mark as much as I could, but in a small school, that wasn't easy. I had to watch them together, laughing, holding hands, acting like nothing was wrong. It was like being stabbed in the chest every single day. Graduation couldn't come fast enough. I just wanted to get out of there, to leave all of it behind and never look back. I went off to college in a different state, determined to start fresh. I made new friends, threw myself into my studies, and tried to move on. But no matter how hard I tried, the betrayal stuck with me. It was like this shadow that followed me everywhere I went. I dated other guys, but I never fully trusted anyone. How could I? The two people I trusted most in the world had betrayed me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it would happen again. Years passed, and life went on. I graduated from college, got a job, and eventually moved back to my hometown to save money. I hadn't spoken to Sarah or Mark in years, and as far as I knew, they were still together. I didn't care anymore, at least, that's what I told myself. I was over it. Or so I thought. Then came the high school reunion. Now, I'm not usually one for reunions, but my friend Amy convinced me to go. She was going, and honestly, I was curious. Part of me wanted to see how everyone had turned out, especially Sarah and Mark. I hadn't thought about them in years, but I guess there was still some unfinished business in my head. The night of the reunion, I walked into the old gymnasium, feeling equal parts nervous and excited. It was strange being back in the place where everything had fallen apart. I caught up with a few old friends, including Amy, and we spent the first part of the night reminiscing about the good old days. It was surprisingly fun, but I couldn't help but keep an eye out for Sarah and Mark. And then, I saw them. Or rather, I saw her. Sarah walked in alone, and I could tell immediately that something was off. She looked tired, worn out, and she didn't have that confident, carefree vibe she used to have. Mark was nowhere to be seen. I tried not to let it get to me, but I'll admit I was curious. What had happened between them? As the night went on, I found myself talking to more and more people, and it wasn't long before I got the full story. Turns out, their perfect relationship had imploded in the most spectacular way possible. A few years after high school, they had moved in together, and everything seemed great on the outside. But behind closed doors, things were a mess. Mark had cheated on Sarah multiple times, and she had become increasingly paranoid and controlling. They fought constantly, and it wasn't long before their relationship crumbled under the weight of their own issues. Apparently, it all came to a head a few months before the reunion, when Sarah found out that Mark had been cheating on her with one of her coworkers. She kicked him out, and they had a nasty breakup that left her emotionally wrecked. From what I heard, Sarah had been trying to pick up the pieces of her life ever since. Now, I'm not going to lie. Part of me felt a little vindicated hearing all of this. I mean, they had betrayed me, and now they were suffering the consequences of their actions. But as I stood there, listening to people gossip about their downfall, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Instead, I felt a weird mix of pity and relief. Pity because, despite everything, I didn't wish that kind of pain on anyone, not even Sarah. And relief because, for the first time in years, I realized I was truly over it. Their drama was no longer my burden to carry. As the night went on, I ran into Sarah. We hadn't spoken since high school, and I wasn't sure what to expect. But when she saw me, she walked over and apologized. Like, genuinely apologized. She admitted that what she and Mark had done was wrong, and she told me that she regretted it every day. She said she understood if I never wanted to speak to her again, but she wanted me to know that she was sorry. I didn't really know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her off, to unleash all the anger and hurt I had bottled up for years. But I didn't. Instead, I just nodded and said, "Thanks." It wasn't much, but it was enough. I didn't need to hold on to that anger anymore. It wasn't doing me any good, and seeing Sarah like that, broken and remorseful, made me realize that clinging to the past was pointless. I left the reunion that night feeling lighter than I had in years. The betrayal that had haunted me for so long no longer had any power over me. Sarah and Mark had their own issues to deal with, and for the first time, I truly didn't care. I was free. Looking back, I realized that losing Sarah and Mark was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It forced me to grow, to learn how to stand on my own, and to figure out who I really was without them. I learned that trust is fragile, but so is resentment. And holding on to either for too long will only weigh you down. So, if there's one thing I've taken away from all of this, it's that people will disappoint you. Sometimes the people you love the most will hurt you in ways you never thought possible. But it's up to you whether or not you let that pain define you. Because in the end, it's not about what they did, it's about how you choose to move forward. And I've chosen to move forward.